Hey guys, welcome back to my channel and thank you so much for watching. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you how I made this Minnie Mouse themed castle cake, so let's get right into it. I'm starting out with two 7-inch cakes. One of them is vanilla and one of them is chocolate. I've cut them in half and leveled them, and I'm going to be stacking those up with some Swiss meringue buttercream. I'm using my small offset spatula to make sure my buttercream is nice and level, and then once my cake is filled, I'm going to be applying a thin layer of buttercream all around the outside to lock in those crumbs, and that's going to be going into the fridge for about 25 minutes to chill. Once you can touch your finger to the buttercream and none of it comes off, it's ready for the final ice. So I'm applying a dollop of buttercream on top of my cake, and then just using my spatula and my turntable, I'm going around and smoothing that out until it's level. I'm applying more buttercream to the sides of my cake, and then with my offset spatula, I'm just smoothing that out as best I can, and then I'm going to go in with my bench scraper and just take off some of that buttercream until the sides are nice and straight and smooth. And then for all of the buttercream that accumulated on the top of my cake, I'm grabbing my spatula and then just keeping it level, dragging that buttercream into the center, just being careful not to mess up my nice smooth top. That's going back in the fridge to chill, and in the meantime, I'm going to start with my fondant. I'm rolling out some white fondant on my cornstarch surface to about 1/8 of an inch thick. If you have any bubbles of air trapped in your fondant, just grab a sharp pin and you can just poke those and then push the air out with your finger. I'm picking that up with my fondant roller and draping that over my chilled cake, and then just working quickly with my hands and my fondant smoother. I'm pushing all the air out from the top of the cake, and then just working my way down, pulling out all of those pleats in the fondant and smoothing until I reach the bottom. I want the edges on my cake to be a little more crisp than I normally go for, so I'm grabbing 2 of my fondant smoothers. One is going to be going up the side of the cake while the other is going over the top, and I'm having them meet right on the edge. I went around and around and around on my cake, and eventually I had more of that sharp edge look that I was going for. To get the texture on my cake, I have this brick impression thingy. I will link the one that I used below. And you can see I definitely struggled with it a little bit. It took a little while for me to get the hang of the pressure I needed to apply, but I basically just started on the bottom and then just tried to line it up as best I could to mark the entire side of the cake. Since my cake is going to be 2 tiers, I need to add some support. I have a small top tier for this, which is why I'm just using regular straws. If you're doing a larger cake, then I would suggest using the big bubble tea straws or some wooden dowels. So I'm spacing those straws out in my bottom tier, and then just using a pair of scissors, I'm just cutting those to size so that they're going to be flush with the top of my cake. I'm adding a smear of buttercream and then just placing my top 4-inch tier and centering it. To make the cylinder that's going to go on top of my cake, I'm rolling out some white fondant, and then I'm just using a piece of cardstock to measure a strip, but if you have a ruler, you can go ahead and use that. Once I had my strip cut out, I grabbed a Febreze can, which was the perfect size for what I wanted. I did clean it, of course, so don't worry about that. I added a little bit of cornstarch on that so my fondant wouldn't stick, and then I just wrapped that around and cut a seam at the back. That needs to completely firm up before I can use it, so I just set that aside to dry. For the towers on my cake, I have these 4 cardboard rolls that I've cut to size. None of this is like exact measurements. Basically, you can just eyeball it and cut whatever size you feel is right for however tall your cake is. I'm wrapping each one of my tubes in some white fondant, so I'm just rolling that out and then making sure that it is wide enough that it's going to cover the whole thing. And I roll that up and then cut a seam, and just with my fingers make sure that the seam is secure in the back. If you need a little extra glue, you can add some shortening or you can add some piping gel. I added the same brick texturing with my impression mat, and then for any spots that I didn't press quite hard enough, I just went over it with my fondant tool. Just like with my cylinder, I want those to firm up before I add them to the cake, so I've just set those aside for now. I'm cutting out another white strip of fondant, and I need to make sure that it's going to wrap all the way around my top tier. And then using some circle cutters and some piping tips, I'm just cutting out the shape of Minnie's head. I brushed the back of my fondant with a little bit of shortening, and then I'm wrapping it around the top tier. It was a hot mess for a second here, if you can't tell. The heads kind of got a little misshapen, but once I got it on there, I just used the piping tips to reshape them, and then my fondant smoother, I just used that to help me get the lines nice and sharp again. I have some light pink fondant that I'm rolling out, and then with a template of Minnie's head, I'm just cutting that out with my X-Acto knife. I will link the template that I use below. And then I have this wood grain impression thingy, and I'm just pushing that into the fondant. And again, if you didn't push hard enough, you can just use your fondant tool just to go over the lines. With my knife, I'm adding a line down the center because this is going to be my door, and I'm brushing the back of that again with a little more shortening and pushing that onto the bottom of my bottom tier. McGreevy Cakes has a really great castle cake tutorial on her channel, and it was a really big help just for like the basic structure, and I really like the way that she shaded the bricks on her cake, so I'm doing that as well. I will link her video below. It's super in-depth, so you should definitely give that one a watch. I have some black color dust and my paintbrush, and I'm just shading in some of the bricks. There's no rhyme or reason, I just picked random ones and went all over my bottom and top tier. To really help smudge the color out, I grabbed a clean Q-tip and just went over each square. And then to add a little more of a color tie-in, because I'm adding some pink to my cake, I grabbed some pink luster dust and just lightly brushed over some of the black. To make the scalloped edge that's going to go along the top of each tier, I have this template that I made for myself. I will link the one that I used below. I rolled out a long strip of white fondant and then just cut that design out with my X-Acto knife. I brushed a little bit of shortening onto the back of each piece and then just wrapped that around the top of each tier, just making sure that it was level. To make the windows that are going to go onto each of my towers, I rolled out strips of white fondant and then just used a circle cutter to cut the tops off, and then just made sure that they were all the exact same height. With my clay extruder, I rolled out some long ropes of white fondant and then just lined those windows. I rolled out more of my white fondant and then cut these thicker strips and placed them underneath my window for the ledge, and then just cut those on either side with my X-Acto knife. Moving back to the door, I have a strip of white fondant that I pressed in that same wooden texture into, and then placed that across the door using a little bit of water. And I put a line right where the line is in the door, and then using my fondant tool, I just marked in some holes. Extruded another long rope of white fondant and then just lined the door. For the final touch, I rolled out some balls of white fondant and created these cute little mini shaped head doorknobs. Check it out. For the tops of each of my towers, I need to roll out a cone shape. So I have a ball of white fondant that I'm just rolling against my counter, just trying to get the top as pointed as possible, making sure that the bottom of that cone shape is going to be the same size as each of the cylinders. Those need to dry, and in the meantime, I'm going to start on some of the border work. So I have this impression mat, and I'm pressing some white fondant into this like string of diamond type shapey thing. And once it's all pressed in there and I know that each cavity is filled, I'm just trimming away the excess with my X-Acto knife, and I'm putting that into the freezer for about 10 minutes. Once it's ready to come out, I basically just turned it upside down and then peeled it back, and it did come out fairly easily. With a little bit of water, I added that to the top and the bottom of that centerpiece on my top tier. For Minnie's head on top of the cake, I'm rolling out my white fondant fairly thick, and then with my circle cutters, I'm cutting out 2 circles and then just taking a little notch out of each one with that circle cutter so that those ears fit really snugly against the head. I've wrapped a styrofoam ball in some white fondant. If you need to see how to do that, I will link another video where I've done that below. And then you can see I have a skewer sticking out of that. I already put one ear on. I brushed a little bit of water on the bottom of the other ear and then just placed that on top of the skewer. Now I was ready to add my towers to my cake, so I started off with my 2 smaller ones. I brushed the sides with a little bit of water to help them stick, and then as an extra step, once I added the cones to the top of each one, I just put a skewer through the very top of that cone and pressed it all the way down until I could feel it going into the cake. This is going to add another little extra layer of support. I did the exact same thing for the bottom towers, except obviously the skewers cannot go through the board, so I just trimmed them down to size so they each still had a little bit of that skewer sticking out of the top. To create the cobblestone effect, all I did was rolled out different size balls of white fondant and then just pressed them down, mushing them together a bit until I had this pathway. To create the bow that's going to go on the top of the styrofoam Minnie's head that I made, I have this strip of white fondant, and I'm lifting the middle part and pinching it together, and then lifting up each of the ends and pinching it together, and then bringing those pinched ends into the middle and just securing that in place. And then with another small strip of white fondant, I'm just wrapping that around for the centerpiece, just trimming it at the back. I wanted to have Minnie's head on top of each tower, which sounds super morbid now that I say it out loud. But to do that, I'm rolling out 2 larger balls and 2 smaller balls, and then some corresponding little balls for each of the ears. To help attach the ears so that they're not going to roll away, I just have some metal floral wire that I'm pressing in to the head and then just putting the ears on there, and I've added a little bit of water just for some extra hold. For the bow and each of the heads, I'm going to cover them with some pink disco dust. I will link the brand that I use below. I brushed each piece with a little bit of shortening and then just sprinkled my disco dust on top of that, and then any spots that weren't covered, I just went over that with my paintbrush. For Minnie's head, I've placed a thicker skewer into the bottom of my styrofoam ball, and I'm placing that into the center of that top cylinder, just making sure that the skewer goes into the cake because that's going to keep that in place. I added each of my little heads on top of those skewers poking out of the towers, and then I added Minnie's bow on top of her head, just secured with a little bit of shortening. To finish off each of the towers, I just cut out a long strip of white fondant and then wrap that around right where the seam is. I mixed together some of my Super Gold Rollcomb Luster Dust with some food grade alcohol, and then using my fine tip paintbrush, I went over the doorknobs and the trim going around the windows, as well as the trim going around the bottom of that cone shape on the towers. With more of my light pink fondant, I rolled out these kind of banana shapes, and then with my fondant tool, I just marked in some lines so they kind of looked like fabric going around the top of that cylinder. And lastly, I wanted to add some teeny tiny little roses, so I just cut out these long thin strips of my pink fondant and just rolled them up. And then using a little bit of water, I stuck them onto the ledge on each of the windows. And this was the final result, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up if you did, and subscribe for new videos every week. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one.